If you've ever been handed a $4,800 check with the words shoe rental share written in the memo line for a business you managed for 24 years, then you already know exactly how my sister views family. I almost didn't pull Dad's old flip phone out of the donation box she filled that afternoon. That phone, a battered silver Motorola Razr V3 with a cracked hinge, a dead battery, and a tiny gold key taped inside the battery door, was the tripwire. By the time it was over, my sister would be oiling lanes at the very alley she tried to steal, wearing a shirt that says gutter of lies, while every score sheet printed her probate fraud docket. This is the story of how a woman who fixed pin setters and counted shoe rentals quietly dismantled a forgery ring run by her own sister. My name is Dana. For 24 years, I managed Pine Ridge Lanes, an 18-lane independent bowling alley on a cracked county highway in a town that smelled like burnt motor oil and fresh lane conditioner every afternoon. I did everything from renting shoes, running league schedules, and mopping the approach, to rebuilding a Brunswick A2 pinsetter from memory using a socket wrench set and a roll of electrical tape. I was 44 years old. I had no spouse, no children, just my dad, the alley, and a savings account that always went back into the business when the water heater blew or the roof leaked before a weekend tournament. My sister Renee left for Scottsdale the month after high school graduation and came back only twice in the next 2 decades. Her husband Brad sold houses and posted pictures of himself next to sold signs, usually with his arms crossed and his jaw tight like he was posing for a magazine cover. Dad was the quiet planner in our family. He kept every receipt, every title, every maintenance log, every little hand-drawn schematic of the ball return mechanism in neat folders in the office. That habit saved me, but I didn't know it yet. He died on a Tuesday morning, alone in the living room, halfway through a crossword puzzle. The neighbor found him when the newspaper piled up on the front step, and the mail started falling out of the box. By Wednesday afternoon, Renee and Brad were standing in Dad's kitchen with a notepad, a file folder, and 2 coffees they didn't offer me. Renee gave me a one-armed hug that smelled like department store perfume and said she and Brad would handle everything. Then she asked where Dad kept the titles to the bowling alley, the house, and the safe deposit box key. Brad started opening cabinets, not to look for a mug, but to look for estate documents. He pulled out a stack of folders from the drawer by the phone and started flipping through them without asking. They didn't ask about the funeral. They didn't ask how I was holding up. They didn't ask if I had eaten or slept or if I needed a hand with the obituary. They asked about assets. I told them Dad had a safe deposit box at Cobalt Community Bank, but I didn't have the key. Renee found Dad's key ring in the nightstand and held up his old silver Motorola Razr V3 with a cracked hinge and a dead battery. She said, "Who keeps this dinosaur?" and dropped it into a plastic donation bin along with Dad's retirement watch and a stack of old bowling magazines. She said they would drop the junk at Goodwill the next day. I watched her set the bin by the back door. That evening, after they left for the bank to poke around, I fished the phone out. I told myself I wanted a reminder of Dad's voice. I did not know I was holding the key to everything. I drove home and plugged the phone into a charger I still had in my junk drawer. Before I turned it on, I popped the back cover to check the battery because the phone had been dead for years and I wanted to see if the old lithium cell had swollen. A small gold key was taped inside the battery door with a frayed piece of medical tape. It had the number 114 etched on the bow. My hands went cold. That was Dad's safe deposit key. He had hidden it in the one thing Renee would never think to check because she thought it was worthless junk. I opened the voice memo app. There were 37 saved memos, mostly reminders about oil patterns, pin inventory, and one about a leaky pipe in lane 4. The last one was labeled Renee Call. It was dated 11 days before Dad died. I pressed play. His voice was thin, wheezy, but clear. He said, "Renee, I am recording this because you lie. The real will is in the safe deposit box. It leaves your sister 60% of Pine Ridge Lanes and this house. I changed it 6 years ago after you and Brad refinanced the condo for the 3rd time and asked me to car-sign. Do not touch it. If you try to sell the land or the equipment, the title company will flag the transfer on death deed I recorded. I have also left a letter with my lawyer. It names you. And Dana, if you ever hear this, do not trust them. Save yourself." The memo clicked off. I replayed it 9 times, sitting on the floor in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear. Then I wrapped the phone in a dish towel, called out sick from the alley, and sat on my kitchen floor until the sun came up. I remember thinking that my father had spent his last days building a trap, and I was standing in the middle of it without knowing the floor plan. Before I continue this story, Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe family and fraud should never be allowed to share a lane. Now back to what happened next. 2 days after the funeral, Renee and Brad sat me down at Dad's dining table with a stack of papers thick enough to stop a door. Renee wore a black pantsuit that looked brand new and kept patting my hand like I was a sick child. Brad opened a leather folio and uncapped a pen that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Renee said I had been through so much, and she and Brad could handle the estate. She said I just needed to sign a limited power of attorney, a letter of no contest, and a quitclaim deed for the house. She called it standard procedure. She said it would let them pay the back taxes and list the property before the market cooled. I looked at the papers. I saw the word quitclaim next to my own name. I saw a clause giving Brad the authority to sell Pine Ridge Lanes and its equipment, including the lane machines, the pins, the ball returns, and the shoe inventory. I saw another clause that said I waived all rights to contest any existing or future will, codicil, or estate document. I felt my pulse in my throat, but I made my voice small and slow. I said I was so foggy and didn't understand half of it. I asked if I could take a few days to let my head clear. Brad smiled like a man who had just gotten a handshake on a commission. He said the bank needed everything by Friday, but they would walk me through it. Then he said I shouldn't be alone. They had moved into Dad's place to manage things and the den was free. I said yes, not because I trusted them, because I needed to see their files, their mail, their laptop screens, and their panic when I stalled. I needed them to think I was too broken to fight. So I played the grieving daughter in an old cardigan, nodded at everything, and quietly photographed every document with my phone before I slid the pages back across the table unsigned. That night I slept on the fold-out couch in the den, surrounded by their unpacked boxes and a stack of moving blankets, and I listened to their real estate calls through the heating vent. The vent ran straight up to the kitchen, and if I lay perfectly still I could hear every word. Over the next 2 weeks I turned myself into a piece of furniture. I cooked breakfast, I sorted the mail, I vacuumed the hallway, I listened. Renee took frantic phone calls at 6 in the morning and 11 at night. She whispered about the lender, the title search, the notary, the closing date. Brad paced in the kitchen, dodged calls from a number that showed up as Pinnacle Funding, and bought himself a lease on a new BMW M4 with money that clearly hadn't cleared. I saw the lease agreement on the counter once. The monthly payment was more than Dad's mortgage, and the lease was in the name of an LLC I had never heard of. I saw a notice from a debt collector addressed to Brad's LLC, stamped urgent. I saw Renee shred papers at midnight, feeding the machine until the bag overflowed with little white strips that looked like confetti. I didn't say a word. I just made coffee and pretended not to notice. But every time I poured a cup, I moved a little closer to the filing cabinet, to the mail basket, to the recycling bin by the back door. The first real break came on a Saturday. The kitchen sink drain backed up, and Brad stood there with a wrench trying to unscrew the trap the wrong direction. Renee yelled at him to just call a plumber, but he kept grunting and banging the pipe with the handle of the wrench. I walked over, took the wrench from his hand, and had the trap off in 90 seconds. I cleaned out a clog of coffee grounds and potato peels, put the trap back and ran the water. Brad said I was good at that. I said I had fixed pin setters for 24 years, so a sink trap was nothing. The truth was I needed to get under the sink because I had noticed a loose baseboard behind the trash can the day before. When I fixed the sink, I saw it again. The baseboard moved when I leaned on it. Behind it was a gap in the drywall, and inside the gap was a 3-ring binder stuffed with papers. I waited until they went to a broker's open house that afternoon, a 2-hour window. Then I pulled it out and sat down at the kitchen table. The binder was labeled estate planning. Inside were drafts of a codicil to Dad's will dated 3 days after he died. The signature on the last page was a bad copy of Dad's shaky handwriting, but it had been notarized by someone named Carla Reyes. I knew that name because she hosted Renee's bunco game in Scottsdale. I later learned she was a mobile notary Renee paid $500 to backdate a stamp and sign a false journal entry. The codicil said Dad revised his will to leave 100% of Pine Ridge Lanes and the house to Renee. It cut me out completely. There were also photocopies of Dad's driver's license, his social security card, and a bank statement with the safe deposit box number. At the bottom of the stack was a wire transfer instruction sheet from a title company called ClearPath Escrow. The amount was $780,000. The buyer was a company called Brightwater Development LLC. The memo said Lakeside Pine Ridge Parcel and Equipment. I sat on the kitchen floor and read every page twice, slowly, the way I used to read oil pattern charts before a tournament. Then I found the second layer. Behind the first binder was a manila folder with a Pinnacle Funding logo. Inside was a loan application for $640,000 made by Brad's LLC using Pine Ridge Lanes as collateral. The application listed me as the co-signer. My signature was on the last page. I had never signed that loan. It was dated 2 days before Dad died, which meant they had been planning this while he was still alive. Behind the loan application was a 1-page summary from a bank in the Cayman Islands showing an account balance of $412,000. The account was in the name of Brightwater Development LLC, and Brad's email was listed as the beneficial owner. That was the moment I understood the entire play. They were not just stealing the alley, they were setting me up to be the legal scapegoat for their debt. If the sale collapsed, the bank would come after me, not them. The forged cosigner signature meant I would owe $640,000 on a loan I never saw, secured by a property I would no longer own. I took photos of every page with my phone, careful to keep the binder clean, then tucked it back exactly where I found it. I matched the angle of the baseboard, pressed it into place, and wiped my fingerprints off the edges with the sleeve of my cardigan. The next day I came back with a small tool kit. When Dad lost the office key in 2003, he taught me how to pick the old cash drawer lock using 2 bent paper clips and a thin strip of aluminum from a soda can. The filing cabinet in Dad's office had the same kind of wafer lock. I waited until Renee and Brad left for a meeting with a notary, a meeting I now know was about backdating more documents. Then I knelt in front of that grey steel cabinet and had it open in under a minute. The lock gave way with a soft click, and I slid the top drawer open. Inside were 6 folders, each one labelled in Dad's neat handwriting. One contained Dad's original will, signed and notarized in front of 2 witnesses. Another contained the forged codicil that had been filed with the county probate court. A third contained a real estate title search that showed a problem for Renee and Brad. Pine Ridge Lanes had a recorded transfer on death deed. The property had passed directly to me the moment Dad died. It was not part of probate. The will and the forged codicil did not control the real estate. Renee and Brad had already signed a purchase agreement, but the title company had flagged the deed and frozen the closing. The 4th folder held bank statements from the operating account, with several large transfers to Brad's LLC circled in red pen by Dad months earlier. The 5th held a copy of the equipment sale agreement, showing $240,000 for the lanes, pins, and shoes. The 6th held a copy of a letter from Dad's lawyer to Renee, dated 6 years earlier, warning her not to touch the property. I used my phone to photograph everything, page by page, then I locked the cabinet back and sat in Dad's chair for a long moment. He had known. He had kept the evidence organized for me. That night I heard Renee screaming at Brad through the den wall. She said, "What do you mean the title search came back with a TOD deed? You said the will controlled everything." Brad said the old man recorded it 6 years ago. He said they could still fix it if I signed a ratification and a distribution deed, but I had been stalling. Renee said, "Then we make her sign. She's not as foggy as she pretends. I saw her reading the escrow statement." I pulled the blanket up to my chin and smiled in the dark. Then I heard Brad say he had already sold the equipment separately and used the money to cover the loan payment on the BMW and a deposit on a new listing. There was a crash, then silence. I stayed very still and listened to the furnace click on. A week later I got a personal check in the mail from Renee's trust account. It was for $4,800. The memo line read shoe rental share. She had sold the equipment separately for $240,000, and this check was supposed to buy my silence, or at least make me think I had received something. I almost laughed. I had counted shoe rental receipts for 24 years. Our annual shoe rental income was $11,000, and my 60% share of that would have been $6,600, not $4,800. She had rounded down because she thought I wouldn't notice. She thought I was too foggy, too broken, too busy grieving to do simple division. I didn't cash the check. I put it in a Ziploc bag and labeled it Exhibitor with a black marker. Then I made myself a cup of coffee and went back to sorting the mail. The transfer on death deed was my father's dead man's switch. He had recorded it 6 years earlier at the county recorder's office without telling Renee. The terms were simple. Upon his death, the real estate of Pine Ridge Lanes would transfer directly to me, outside probate, outside the will, outside any codicil. Renee could forge 100 codicils and it wouldn't matter. The equipment sale had closed because equipment does not have a deed. But the land, the building, the lease, the parking lot, the 18 lanes, those were locked to me alone. I needed an ally who could make this stick in court. I called the bank manager at Cobalt Community Bank, a woman named Geraldine Okonkwo, who had known Dad for 20 years and still kept a bowl of peppermints on her desk. She told me Dad had come in 6 years ago, updated the safe deposit box, and recorded the transfer on death deed. He also left a notarized letter with the bank's trust department. It said that if his daughter Renee or her husband Brad attempted to sell Pine Ridge Lanes after his death, the bank should freeze all associated accounts and notify his daughter Dana immediately. The letter said they would forge documents. It said Dana would need the original will and the recorded deed, and that they were in his box. Geraldine said she had already flagged the Pine Ridge Lanes escrow account when the title company called about the TOD deed. She told me the title company had frozen the $780,000 sale. She also said the bank's fraud compliance officer had filed a suspicious activity report with FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, because the equipment sale proceeds had moved through the operating account into Brad's LLC and then partly to a Cayman account. She asked me if I could help the county prosecutor gather final proof. I said yes. I said I could get the notary journal. That weekend I met with Geraldine and a probate attorney named Marla Whitfield at the bank in a conference room with frosted glass walls. Marla confirmed that the forged codicil had been submitted to the probate court by Renee's attorney 19 days after Dad died. The court had scheduled a hearing, but the TOD deed made the codicil irrelevant to the real estate. However, Renee had also been appointed temporary executor of Dad's estate because she presented the forged codicil and swore an oath in open court. That appointment gave her access to Dad's bank accounts. She had already transferred $230,000 out of the operating account to Brad's LLC. The bank could reverse that if the prosecutors got involved. Marla said the best play was to let Renee and Brad keep believing they could fix everything if I signed a ratification deed. She said to let them march me to the title office and put the documents in front of me. She said the sheriff's deputy and a bank fraud investigator would be waiting in the manager's office, but she needed one more piece of evidence. The original notary journal entry from the night Renee backdated the codicil. The notary, Carla Reyes, had recorded a false certificate, and if we could prove the journal was backdated or the stamp was used without the proper identification, the whole codicil would collapse. I told her I could get it. I knew exactly where Renee kept her notary stamp. She had left it in the den in the top drawer of the filing cabinet next to the binder when she was looking for a pen. I had seen it while I was folding laundry. 4 days before the probate hearing, I decided to test them one last time. I needed to know if there was any scrap of family left. I also needed Renee's notary journal, which she kept in her purse, and I could only get it if she left the room in a panic. I waited until a Friday afternoon. I had taken an old nitroglycerin bottle from Dad's medicine cabinet and emptied it into the toilet. I filled it with sugar tablets from the pantry, the little white discs that dissolve on your tongue. I collapsed in the kitchen doorway, gasping, grabbing my chest, letting my knees buckle. I slid down the doorframe and went limp on the tile. Renee was in the dining room with Brad, flipping through a folder with the ratification deed and the distribution deed inside. Brad said, "Should we call 911? Renee said, "Not yet. She's just being dramatic." Grab the folder. "We need to get to the title office before 4. Then she walked toward me, stepped over my outstretched arm and picked up the folder with the ratification deed from the kitchen counter. She looked down at me and said, "When you're done with the theatrics, we have a meeting." She stepped over my legs. I lay there with my eyes closed, listening to her sandals click past my head and out the door. Brad followed her, and he did not stop to check on me either. He just grabbed his keys and said, "Hurry up, the escrow officer closes at 4. That was the exact moment my family loyalty died. I had staged the collapse to see if they'd help. They didn't. They didn't check my pulse. They didn't call anyone. They grabbed the folder and walked out the door. I waited until I heard the garage door close and the BMW engine fade down the street. Then I stood up, wiped the kitchen floor with a rag, and opened Renee's purse. The notary journal was in a zippered pocket, along with her stamp and a small ink pad. I photographed the page where Carla Reyes had signed, the page with Dad's forged signature, and the page with the backdated date. Then I put everything back exactly as I found it, except the journal, which I left on the counter next to the sugar tablets so she would see it later and know I had been inside her things. I called Marla and said, "I'm done, let's end this." On the morning of the probate hearing, Renee told me I was coming with them to the title office to straighten out a small title issue. She said if I didn't sign, the whole estate would get tied up in court and I would lose anyway because they had a codicil. She said this was easier for everyone. She said it in that syrupy voice like she was doing me a favor. I put on the same old cardigan and got in the back seat of Brad's BMW. The leather smelled new. Renee kept checking her phone and muttering about the closing. Brad drove with one hand and adjusted his collar. I sat in the back with my hands folded and my stomach tight. I knew from Marla that Geraldine had already called the county sheriff. 2 deputies were waiting in the title company's break room. A bank fraud investigator was waiting in the parking lot in an unmarked sedan. I did not let myself smile. The escrow officer, a nervous man in a short-sleeve shirt with sweat rings under the arms, led us into a conference room. The wall had a map of the county and a picture of a sailboat. He laid out 7 documents in a neat row. The top one was a ratification of sale and distribution of estate assets. It said I agreed to the sale of Pine Ridge Lanes for $780,000 and acknowledged receiving my full inheritance of $4,800, payable as shoe rental share. The second document was a distribution deed that transferred any remaining interest to Renee. The third was a letter of no contest. The fourth was a limited power of attorney. The fifth was a release of claims against the estate. The sixth was a consent to the sale of the equipment. The seventh was a blank signature card for a new bank account. I almost laughed, but I kept my face still. Brad handed me a pen. He said, "Sign there, there and there. Then we'll have a notary come in. We'll all be done by lunch." Renee was watching me the way a hawk watches a field mouse in a cornfield. I picked up the pen. I clicked it twice, then I set it down on the table. "No," I said. "I don't sign forged documents." Renee's face went white. Brad said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I know about the codicil Carla raised, the Pinnacle funding loan application and the Cayman account. I know you forged my signature on a $640,000 loan. I know you filed a probate fraud docket. I know you backdated a notary journal. And I know Dad recorded a transfer on death deed 6 years ago. That property is already mine. You cannot sell it, you cannot borrow against it, and you cannot force me to sign it away." Renee reached across the table and grabbed my wrist, her fingernails digging into my skin. She said, "Sign the damn paper, Dana, or I swear I'll have you declared incompetent. I'll call the sheriff and say you're a danger to yourself." I looked her in the eye. "I'd rather lose everything than sign one more lie for you." At that exact moment, the conference room door opened. 2 sheriff's deputies stepped in, followed by Geraldine and a county prosecutor named Alan Voss. Geraldine said, "Renee Torrance and Bradley Torrance, you are under arrest for probate fraud, forgery, attempted grand theft, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult." Brad dropped his pen and it rolled under the table. Renee started screaming that she was the victim, that I was the one committing fraud, that the codicil was real and the deed was forged. The deputies read them their rights. The escrow officer stood up and said he was cancelling the entire transaction. The transfer on death deed meant I already owned Pine Ridge Lanes. The bank had unfrozen Dad's accounts and reversed the $230,000 transfer. The forged codicil was void. The title company had flagged the sale as fraudulent. A detective walked in with a copy of the notary journal page, the one I had photographed, and Renee's voice went quiet for the first time. She stared at me with pure hatred. She said I would never run that place without her. I said, "I ran it for 24 years without you. I think I'll manage." Then the deputies put the handcuffs on and led them out to the squad cars. I sat in that conference room chair, still wearing Dad's old cardigan, and watched through the window as my sister was placed in the back seat with her hands behind her back. Brad stood on the curb with his shoulders slumped, and the BMW stayed parked in the lot for 3 days before the bank repossessed it. The next few months were a blur of depositions, bank statements, and court dates. The county prosecutor charged Renee with 4 felonies: probate fraud, forgery, attempted grand theft, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Brad was charged with conspiracy to commit forgery, filing a fraudulent loan application, and theft by deception. The notary, Carla Reyes, accepted a plea deal and testified against them. She admitted backdating the codicil and falsifying Dad's signature for $500 cash. She said Brad had paid her with a personal check from the LLC, and Renee had given her a bottle of wine. The Pinnacle funding loan application was traced to Brad's laptop, and the forged promissory note in my name was thrown out after a handwriting expert testified that my signature was a poor trace. The Cayman account was frozen as part of a federal suspicious activity report. Renee's attorney tried to argue that the transfer on death deed was invalid because Dad was not of sound mind, but Geraldine produced the notarized letter from 6 years earlier and the bank's records of the notary appointment. Dad had gone to the bank with 2 witnesses, both county employees who testified that he was sharp as a tack and had a binder with his estate plan. The probate judge issued a summary judgment invalidating the forged codicil. The real will from the safe deposit box left me 60% of Pine Ridge Lanes and the house. The other 40% was in a trust for the business, with me as sole trustee. That meant I controlled everything anyway. The land, the building, the lanes, the parking lot, the equipment, all of it came back to me. The bank reversed the $230,000 transfer. The title company cancelled the sale. The equipment was recovered from a warehouse in Phoenix where Brad had stored it, still wrapped in plastic and smelling like diesel. Renee was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. Brad got 2 years and lost his real estate license. The court ordered them to pay restitution of $640,000, including the $230,000 they had transferred out of Dad's bank account and the $240,000 from the equipment sale. They seized the BMW, the furniture, and 2 investment accounts. The probation department approved a community service condition. I asked the judge for one thing: let Renee complete her community service hours at the bowling alley. The judge ordered it. He looked at me over his glasses and said, "I think that is a fitting form of restitution, Ms. Dana." I said, "So do I." I renamed the alley Split of Deceit Lanes. I kept every lane, every ball, every shoe rack. I bought new pins and a new oiler. A casual walk behind that hummed like a lawn mower. I had a local print shop make a specific shirt for Renee. It is bright orange, with black letters on the back that say Gutter of Lies. On the front it says Property of the Lane Crew. Every score sheet at the alley now prints a footer that reads Renee Torrance, case number PB 2024-0817, probate fraud, forgery, attempted theft, community service hours remaining. The credit card receipts carry a QR code that links to the county court docket. The first Saturday she reported for duty, she stood at the front desk with a mop and refused to oil the lanes. The community service supervisor told her she could oil lanes or pick up shoe rental gum under the tables. She chose the oiler. She didn't say one word to me. She just wheeled the machine out to lane 1, and I watched her face when she saw the shirt I had left on the bench next to her time card. She put it on without looking at me and she started oiling. A group of league bowlers clapped when she finished the first lane. I watched her from the masking units, the same place Dad used to stand when I was a teenager. He was a quiet man, but he had seen this coming. He knew Renee would come for me, so he built a trap in the form of a recorded deed and a hidden key and a voice memo on a phone she thought was junk. He saved me without ever raising his voice. I think about that every time I walk the concourse and smell the lane oil. Boundaries are not a betrayal. They are a form of love. The people who truly care about you will never ask you to sign away your own name. And if they do, check the battery compartment. And if the check says shoe rental share, do not cash it. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe that family and fraud should never share a lane, hit like and subscribe. We tell stories like this every week for people who know that the truth often hides in the smallest, most ordinary places. Until next time, guard your name, your signature, and the people who know how to fix a pin setter.